My name is Bill Lubick. I'm the County Agricultural Agent and Professor with Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Middlesex County. And I'm very pleased to introduce Vivian Moore. She's going to be speaking with us tonight. And Vivian brings a lot of expertise with her. She's been working with us over the years, getting many of our plants started Earth Center Gardens, and she does a terrific job. So we're very fortunate to have her expertise tonight. And she's going to be talking about selecting seeds for your vegetable garden needs. And she's going to explain all the techniques that she uses to keep those plants healthy. Vivian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, good evening, fellow and future gardeners. I hope this evening finds you well and ready to start planning your garden. And before you start, and it was interesting that Bill was just here, last week he did a presentation on soil testing and composting. And if you've never had a vegetable garden on the plot of ground that you want to use, I really suggest you get a soil test so that you know if the soil needs to be amended. If you check out his presentation, which was aired last Thursday on March 18th, you will find it very beneficial. There are 3 types of soil tests that you can get, and the best thing to do would be contacting your local county extension service about that, because you want to be able to have soil that's going to be best to be able to produce the kinds of plants and therefore the kinds of vegetables that you really want, instead of going through all the trouble and having some deficiency in the soil that could have easily been fixed. One of the things you have to plan on is the size space that you have and the size plant you may end up with. And there are 2 basic types, determinate and indeterminate. The determinate plant has growth that is limited. Once it reaches that height, it sets its fruit. Some determinate tomatoes do not need to be supported. The indeterminate variety will continue to grow throughout the season while setting fruit. And these plants need to be supported, otherwise they'll become top heavy, fall over. Your fruit will be on the ground, starting to rot, and that's not really what you'd want to have happen. So the first thing you have to do is decide what your vertical space is, whether or not you need to support your plants. And if so, you may have to purchase some stakes to be able to do so, or some sort of cages. 2 other terms that you need to be familiar with are hybrid versus heirloom. The hybrid plant is derived as a cross between genetically different parents to produce a plant with desirable traits. They may be vigor, uniformity, disease resistance, color, any number of things. However, if you were to save and plant the seed from a hybrid tomato, you may get a plant that's one of its parents. So you might be a little bit surprised at what you would get the next year. So it's best to buy seed fresh every year, or if you're saving it, which you can do, just not to save the seed from the fruit that you get from one year to the next. On the other hand, an heirloom plant is what we call open pollinated, or it comes true to type when the seed is saved and replanted. Many heirloom tomatoes set fruit all at once, and then very little the rest of the season. Some people like this if they're doing canning or making paste or using it in some sort of cooking. So I will tell you though, a lot of people will say that the heirloom tomatoes taste better than the hybrid, but that's again a matter of taste. I know people who swear by heirloom tomatoes, and that's all they ever want to plant. But again, you have to make sure that you're going to get them all at one time for the most part. And then you have to be able to plan what you're going to do with all of those tomatoes at that point. The seeding schedule, and we are actually pretty much in the middle of our seeding schedule right now, because all seeds do not get seeded at the same time. And the next couple of slides are going to describe some of the more common and popular plants that people will grow from seed and the approximate seeding week that we as Middlesex Master Gardeners use. All of this is based upon the latest frost date in your area. In New Jersey, we consider it to be around Mother's Day, which is the second Sunday in May. So as I said, it's certainly not too early to start some seed. So the first or second week of March, which is well past, you'd want to seed onions, since many varieties need over 100 days to reach maturity, as well as leeks. A lot of people like to buy onion sets, and then you don't have to worry about seeding. Third week of March, seeding the hot peppers. If it's possible, get a fine mix that drains easily, as hot peppers don't like soggy soil, and hot peppers germinate better with bottom heat. We seeded our hot peppers for our Earth Center gardens last week, and they're starting to pop up. So the bottom heat really helps the hot peppers. And as I said, you really need a fine mix for this so that it doesn't get waterlogged. Otherwise, they'll get soggy and the roots will start to rot. Fourth week of March is seeding eggplant. The last week of March and beginning of April, this is probably the time when most people will start seeding. Sweet peppers, parsley, spinach, tomatoes, you can start, but really the first whole week of April is the best time to start seeding the tomatoes and the basil. The tomatoes being one of the most popular vegetables that we grow. The third or fourth week, if you want to get an early start on some varieties, you can, or just directly seed in your garden after your last frost date. And they would include lettuce, cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, beans, melons. Some people like to be able to have a plant to actually put in the garden other than just throwing seed on the soil. So you certainly could start that the third or fourth week of April, considering now at that point you would have 2 or 3 weeks before Mother's Day. So you should be able to give your plants a little start, and you should have some nice little plants to put in. The following are vegetables that are best directly seeded in your garden, as they do not like to be transplanted: radish, carrots, beets, turnips, peas. Although I have seen, and I know people who have purchased basically carrot sets and have had success with them. However, generally we do not start these earlier. Especially radishes, you put some radish seeds in and before you know it, they'll be growing. They grow very quickly, usually the first vegetable of the season. So it's really nice to be able to start with that. Gives yourself a little bit of success right away. And then we have your brassicas, which are basically your cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and broccoli. They like cooler weather, and sometimes they will not tolerate a hot Jersey summer too well. You may have to put some shade over it with a shade cloth to be able to keep them going, because they do like cooler weather to grow. So you want to plant them as soon as danger of frost has passed, which at this point here in New Jersey, I'm not quite sure anymore when that's going to be. Yes, after Mother's Day, but these nice days are kind of a teaser that we've had. Or even earlier to provided you cover them against the freezing weather. So if you really want to take on a challenge, you can make little hoops and cover them with some ground cover and cloth, and you'd probably be all right. Once the heat of summer sets in, they'll tend to bolt, which means they will just grow to flower. And when the plant puts forth vertical growth and sets the flower, you won't get the vegetable the way you want it to be. So we have seeds that come in many different sizes. The onion, tomato, and even lettuce, which is lettuce seed pretty much looks like grass seed. And you can see it there on the picture. They can be seeded individually, perhaps with the aid of tweezers. Something like thyme, which actually in this picture kind of looks like peppers, but it is actually seed, it is not pepper. The thyme and others are so dust-like, even petunia seeds, very, very fine, and need to be scattered or broadcast. You could place just a few seeds in a small spoon or a folded note card, and then just scatter the seed in your pot. Keep in mind, please keep in mind, every seed is a potential plant. So if you get a packet of seeds and it says 50 seeds in it, even though it may not even fit in a quarter teaspoon, there are 50 potential plants there. You do not want to be planting or seeding them in something like a margarine container that's got possibly a 2.5, 3-inch diameter. It's best to hold back a little bit and just do a few. You can find several varieties of small seed in pelleted form, which makes it much, much easier to work with. Check the seeding instructions, as some require extra care so that the pelleted part breaks down. As with all seed, do not touch the seed. And usually the pelleted seed says on the packet, and that has to do with whatever the coating is, that you really shouldn't touch it. It is possible to transmit viruses to the seed as well as vice versa. You can, I know people who are very, very allergic to, believe it or not, tomato seeds. And if they touch any part of their skin with the tomato seed, they'll start breaking out. So it's best just not to touch the seed. Put it in a note card and distribute it evenly, and you'd be best. The other thing with seed is with hot pepper seeds, if you accidentally touch the seed and then rub your eyes or something, you might feel it quite a bit later on. I also recommend that you purchase your seed from a reputable company, especially if you're going to get seed that you're going to be eating the results of, whether it's lettuce or even if it's, let's say, tomato seeds that you're going to be eating the fruit. If you're going to consume any part of it, I really would suggest you get it from a reputable company. And there are plenty of them around, although I know a lot of them are being inundated this year with requests. Most reputable companies will say that their seed is non-GMO. So you can go online and check that out, because just about all of them that I know of, what they basically say is that they do not knowingly sell seed that is GMO. And that's about the best that they can do, because they're not always growing that seed. They're getting them from distributors, but they are not knowingly selling GMO seed. So you want to check that out. If you're going to purchase seed for something that's ornamental, you probably could get that online. Again, be careful. I guess it was last year, there was some seed coming in from other countries that was just arriving in people's mailboxes for no reason. And that can be a problem if it becomes an invasive species. Nobody knew what it was. It wasn't identified. So you want to stay away from that. So just be careful. Best to deal with a reputable company, no matter what you're doing. As I said before, seed what you need. The quantity of seeds in a pack range from less than 10 sometimes to well over 100, depending upon the variety and what kind of seed it is. You probably don't need to buy 100 tomato seeds. If you can get less, that's probably best. So determine how many of each variety plant you need and seed that, plus 1 or 2 more. You'll see on a packet of seeds, it usually says 90% germination, 85% germination rate, something along those lines. That's why I said seed what you need, plus 1 or 2 more in case 1 or 2 of those seeds don't germinate. You still end up with what you want. Unless you want to supply your whole neighborhood with plants. And then, of course, it'll only be that one variety. Most seed lasts for a year or 2, but if possible, you'd want to store it in a cool place like your refrigerator. It just helps keep the seed longer. If you happen to have a root cellar, I suppose that would be a good place for it, but most people don't have that anymore these days. So if you can find a little corner of your refrigerator, put it in a little baggie and tuck it away in the corner of your refrigerator, and you should be able to use it fine the next year. What I would suggest, however, is the second year, maybe plant 3 extra seeds from what you want. Just because every year there is a degradation and the seed may not quite germinate as well as you would want it to the same as the first year. So if you're going to be seeding, make sure you have everything ready. Your seeding mix, water, plug trays or pots, mixing bowl, marking pen and labels, heating mat, which is optional, lighting, dome or plastic cover to cover the seeds. I did a presentation last November on seeding, and if you didn't catch it and you want to go back and see it, it happens to be at episode 21, and there's the link on YouTube to get to it. And I go through different type of seeding, how you would seed larger seeds, smaller seeds. Some seeds need covering. Really, really small seed, generally, you don't want to cover it. So I go through all of that, as well as some of the supplies that you need, which you can see in the picture on the left and the picture on the right. This is actually in my basement. Lighting, a plug tray with a plastic dome over it. There's nothing in it the time that I took it. However, this whole space is now filled with plug trays and plants. To be able to seed a few of many varieties, you can use a plug tray that can be purchased from any garden center. And this is what I do, actually, so that I know what is what. I take it, this is half of one. There's, if you can see, it's 6 by 6. There's a whole nother one that would fit right next to it. So it really goes from 1 to 12, A through F. And I have a template, as you can see below it, on a piece of paper. And if I put, and I just use an example, celebrity tomatoes in cells A1 through A4, all right, which would be across the top, those 4. All right, and then super sweet cherry tomatoes in B1 through B3, and then California Wonder Peppers in A5 and A6, and B4 and B6. Then I can just mark it on the piece of paper below so that I know what it is. Now, certainly there's going to be a difference between the tomato plants that come up and the pepper plants, and I'll be able to tell by the leaf. However, between a celebrity tomato and a super sweet 100 cherry tomato, initially, they all look the same. So I really would want to know which it is. And therefore, by marking it on the little chart, it just helps to show it and to keep in mind what it is, so that you don't get confused later on when you go planting it in the garden and you think you're planting a super sweet 100 and it's really a celebrity or something to that effect. So just a checklist of what you basically need if you're going to do indoor seeding. Your containers or pots that you're going to put seeds in, a small basin or a bowl. When you get potting soil mix, and please do not use your garden soil, get some potting soil mix. Your plants will do much better. 1, 2, if you use garden soil, you don't know what little bugs and other undesirable things you may be bringing in. So a bag of potting soil mix would be the best. And it comes very dry. And I'm finding that I'm adding a lot of water to it, which is okay. But it also will dry out your hands a lot. So you may want to wear gloves doing it. So that's why I say a small basin or a bowl to put the growing mix in it, to be able to add water to it. You want to be able to get it to the point where it kind of clumps together. You don't want it to be able to squeeze it and have water drain out of it. That's a little bit too wet. But just so that it clumps together a bit. You need a watering can or a spray bottle, some sort of labeled plastic sticks or template so that you know what is where. And if you're using multiple containers, you can just put a little plastic stick or even a popsicle stick in it and just make a label, some sort of a marking pencil or pen to be able to use. A plastic cover, or what also works very well is a plastic baggie. Just tuck your pot inside the bag and you've created a little greenhouse effect. A notebook or something to record when you've done what. Basically, I just write on the packet when I seeded something. But if you want to really do a good job, keep a notebook of it. Some sort of a scooper, plastic spoon, or small trowel to move the mix around. Plastic spoons, plastic forks are great tools to be able to use. A wooden skewer that you use for shish kebab kind of thing, which makes it really easy to move a seed out of a packet, especially something like a tomato seed or a pepper seed, a larger seed. Fold a note card so that you can just put a few seeds in it and work at a time. A pair of snips, and then of course your seeds. After you finally get your plants to grow and you need to start moving them outside, you have to be very careful because they're just little baby seedlings. However, you have to get them adjusted to the great outdoors from your cozy home or greenhouse. And this is a process called hardening off. So about 1 to 2 weeks before you plant them in the garden, you want to go through a couple steps. This is not mine, but it's very much like mine, cart. You want to bring them outside during the daytime on a cart or a table in a protected area from the wind, and when the temperature is above 50 degrees. Actually, I'm doing this right now with some pansies that I started in the beginning of January that hopefully will get planted next week or so. So I'm bringing them out during the day and I'm rolling them back inside at night. So you want to place the seedlings initially in an area where they'll not get direct sunlight. After a couple days, allow a little bit more sun until you get to a full day of sun. Actually, when I put them out today, there was no sun at all, so it was pretty appropriate. Make sure you bring your plants in at night because we are still having some really cold nights. Any questions?
Okay, so one from Barbara, talking about seedlings. If they don't drop the seed coat, is there a preferred way to remove it without damaging the seedling?
Oh, if it's like
If the
stuck to the top of it or
right.
something. Sometimes you can pick it off. Onions are like that. They just kind of keep on the tip of the onion plant. Sometimes you can just pick it off. Usually you'd want to wait for it to discharge it by itself. If it's not readily coming off, you probably want to wait a little while until it will come off. I mean, sometimes you can, if you just touch it, sometimes it'll come off. But you don't want to force it off.
Right. It's not going to hurt if if the seed coat's left on.
Right.
I have a question here about lamps and heating mats. So Lou's bought a lamp but still has leggy plants. And then also, what would you advise to use as far as holding the lamp up above the seedlings?
Well, it also depends upon what kind of light you have. Using an incandescent is really not going to do a good job for you, and you will get leggy plants. The fluorescents and the LEDs are the best to use unless you're going to go all out and buy grow lights, which you don't necessarily have to do. And I talk about this in the presentation I did last fall. But when you have your, when you first seed and you have your cover over them, you want to have your grow lights or your fluorescent lights maybe an inch or two above the plastic. You just want to keep it far enough away that it's not going to deteriorate the plastic. And then if you have them on heating mats, they should come up fairly quickly. And as soon as most of the seeds germinate, you want to take the plastic off. Otherwise, you could get very leggy plants because of that, as well as the heating mat. You don't want to keep plants on the heating mat continuously. It's really to help them germinate, not necessarily to help them grow a lot. And then as soon as the plants start reaching up to the lights, you want to raise it. And I'm just going to, in answer to your question, I'm just going to go back since I can. If you take a look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that my lights are suspended on a chain. And this would be very high if I was seeding. I would want to have this light lower, closer to the top of the plastic while my plants were my seeds were germinating. And then I would gradually raise it as the plants started to grow.
Great. And then what did you mean by a seed set? You want to explain that?
You can purchase onions and carrots. I don't know if any, I guess maybe leeks do too. And from reputable companies, and they'll send you basically a dormant plant. And then you can just bring it out of dormancy and plant it so that it's already germinated. And so you don't have to go through the whole seeding process. Have you dealt with any of those, Angela? I haven't.
Yeah, so I've purchased shallot and onion sets before for our garden, and they seem to work really well. Like Vivian said, you don't have to start them from seed, which onion seeds can take a long time to germinate. And I feel like if you're just starting out and you want to grow onions, they're a really good plant to grow. And by purchasing sets, you'll have a better success rate.
So, a word about choosing the right tomato for you. This is the Garden State, and most people will say there's nothing like a Jersey tomato. So we go beefsteak to cherries. So select the variety of tomato you want to grow based on your needs. And you have your beefsteak, which is sometimes over a pound, to your cherry tomato, which is one bite, grows like grapes, as you can see on the right. And they are very productive. As a matter of fact, I always have a cherry tomato plant on my deck so that I can graze when I go out on my deck and pick a couple and just pop them in my mouth. So not only do tomatoes come in varieties of sizes, but color as well. A lot of people will say there's a difference in the taste, but as they say, you eat with your eyes first, so the color really depends upon your preference. Personally, I like my tomatoes red, but a lot of people like the yellows, they like the purples. It's up to you. And you can be adventurous. Now, I mentioned before that I keep a tomato plant on my deck. And if you don't have a yard, no problem. Use a container. There are several tomato plants that are specifically advertised for containers due to their heavy stem and determinate growth. This would be a case where using a determinate plant would be an excellent idea. You'll need a container that is 5 gallons or larger. Those 5-gallon buckets that you get from a variety of stores work just well, and I use them myself. Just make sure you drill a few holes in the bottom for drainage. And I think from the picture here, which is not my deck, but could very well be, but mine are typically orange, only because of where the store is in reality to where I am. I tend to be there more. You can put just about a tomato plant in a container, even if it is indeterminate. As I said, I have a Super Sweet 100 in one. I just make sure that it is staked, and I can go out on my deck at any time and grab a couple tomatoes without having to go all the way down to my garden. Just make sure that it gets plenty of water and fertilizer. And as I said, if it's an indeterminate variety, give it support. And there is a presentation coming up on container gardening later on in April. Fertilizing is a pretty important part that you have to take care of because your vegetable plants tend to be heavy feeders. So there's a critical nutrient needs when getting established during flowering and fruiting. That's why I said in the beginning of this presentation, you really want to be able to know what your soil conditions are to start with. And that's why I suggested getting a soil test. Because once you know where you are to start with, then you know what to add. So an application of organic matter, whether it's compost or chemical fertilizer, it's going to add nutrients to sustain a higher yield. As I said, your vegetables are heavy feeders, especially during flowering and fruiting. So they need to constantly pretty much be fed and have enough nutrients there so that you get a high yield. To get your seedlings after they have their true leaves, which is your second set. In a tomato plant, as I said before, all tomato plants and a lot of plants, the first set of leaves look very much alike to one another. When you get your second set of leaves or your true leaves, now you can tell the difference between a tomato plant and a pepper plant. And transplants off to a strong start, applying on the plant foliage or around the plants. So you can use a chemical fertilizer, a 10-10-10, which is 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphoric acid, and 10% potash, or a 24-8-16 or something similar. Something that's water soluble. make sure you follow the instructions and you don't have it too strong. Probably best to keep it a little bit on the lighter side, especially with your young seedlings. And you want to make sure you mix it really, really well. Some of the dry fertilizers that have to be mixed with water don't, and they tend to settle to the bottom a little bit. So you either have to shake it and make sure that it's completely mixed, or use something that's already a liquid solution, so you don't have to worry about the granular part of it. Organic fertilizers such as compost, manure, cottonseed meal, alfalfa meal, blood meal, fish emulsion, and kelp would be on the organic side as opposed to the chemical side. Fertilize your eggplant, tomato, and peppers after the first fruits form, or if the plant growth is lagging. If you have an indeterminate tomato plant and it's only maybe 3 feet tall by the middle of July, it needs some sort of fertilization because it should be much bigger by then. One word of warning, you can over-fertilize. You can burn the plants or stimulate the leaf growth at the expense of the fruit. So you might get this really bushy plant and no fruit. So please, please, please follow the label directions. So the following couple of slides, I'm going to go through some of the Master Gardener favorites. And over the years, we've discovered what are some of our favorites, which is what I have listed here. And there are favorites which we grow quite a few of, and due to several factors. Sometimes it's disease resistance, how well they produce, the taste, and the size. So when I was talking about choosing your tomato before, I referred to a beefsteak. So that's right around a pound, 12 to 16 ounces. And the two that are a couple of our favorites are Beefy Boy and Country Taste. Red hybrid, these are a little bit smaller. Still wonderful for a sandwich. Your big beef, your celebrity, and your damsel. So you can see it's just a little bit smaller. A determinate type. Now, both the beefsteak and the red hybrid are indeterminate, but one of our favorite determinate is the BHN 589, and that makes a nice size tomato. There are low acid tomatoes. One of them is Jetstar, another one is Lemon Boy. So if you do need something that is a little bit lower acid, those are two that you might want to check into. On the cherry tomato list, as I talked about before, one of my favorites, the Super Sweet 100s, and the Sun Gold. A paste would be Pisano. A container, Bush Goliath. Now, the Bush Goliath is a true container plant. It is determinate. It has a really sturdy stem as it's growing, so it really doesn't need to be supported, although it wouldn't hurt, especially if your fruit starts weighing your plant down. But as I said, I put just about any tomato in a 5-gallon bucket, and as long as I water it enough and I feed it, it's fine. A couple of our favorite heirlooms are Mortgage Lifter, the Rutgers, the Ramapo, and the Boxcar Willie. As far as hot and sweet peppers, the hot peppers favorites, hot banana, the jalapeno, habaneros, and lemon drop. The sweet peppers. And please be aware, your bell peppers at first are green and then will turn red or even orange or yellow, depending upon the variety that you have. As they ripen, they also become sweeter. So most people wonder why a red pepper is more expensive than a green pepper. And it's because it had to be on the vine, on the plant longer. So it's longer to harvest. However, the red peppers are generally sweet. Most people consider the sweetest, or even sweeter than the yellow and the orange. The green bells are not quite as ripe as the red or the orange or the yellow. So keep in mind, don't be too anxious. If you have a green pepper, wait a while and you might find an improvement in taste as it ripens. Some of our favorites are Lady Bell, Sweet Banana, Lunchbox, and one of our big favorites is the Oratani, which is a Rutgers variety, but you can't find the seed for sale. It was developed a number of years ago by one of the professors at Rutgers. It is an heirloom variety, and we plant it and we collect the seed from it every year. And we've been able to perpetuate the plants from year to year. So we have it cleaned, and I'll be seeding them next week. Some other veg garden favorites for cucumbers, your homemade pickles, your diva, the muncher, spinach, Bloomsdale longstanding, zucchini, the black beauty or butternut, depending upon your preference, your onions, and some onions are better for long storage than others, so you have to consider your needs. But as Angela was mentioning, you may want to get an onion set. Onions really should have been seeded the beginning of March anyway, so it's a little bit late to start seeding onions right now. So if you do want to do onions, probably best to get some sets. But one of our favorites is the Patterson. And then a quick word about herbs. Many herbs are easy to grow, such as basil. Look for varieties that are downy mildew resistant, which you may see written as DMR, downy mildew resistant. Two Rutgers varieties are Obsession and Devotion, which are DMR. Parsley, rosemary, thyme, chives, oregano. All of these can be grown in pots and hanging baskets, or even mixed in with your annuals in your gardens to add a little greenery. If you do grow mints, and a lot of people like to be able to grow mints, it's nice and refreshing in your tea in the summertime, be sure to put them in a pot because they can be invasive and can spread and take over your garden and become very difficult to get rid of, and you don't really need that much mint. While some herbs such as garlic and fennel can be grown in a pot, it should be a deep pot because they have a tap root. So you want something like a 10-inch deep pot. So again, using those 5-gallon containers can come in really handy. But again, if you do use that, make sure you have drilled some holes into the bottom of your pots. While some herbs are perennials, such as rosemary, it also depends how severe the winter is and whether or not it'll survive. So if you have them in pots on your deck or patio, you may try to bring them in for the winter and keep them in a sunny location. I have a rosemary and I left it in my garden. However, I also made sure I put a lot of leaf material around it to protect it. And I'm curious to see it still looks good. I think it's going to be fine, even though we did have a very snowy winter and it was covered for quite a few days with snow, but it looks like it's going to be okay. I hope this has given you some ideas of what to do to have a successful garden this summer. And if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Vivian, have you ever had experience in growing potatoes and carrots in pots?
No, I do know people who have done potatoes in pots and it would be in pots, and we're successful with it.
Mary was asking about growing potatoes and carrots in pots and amending the potting soil to be more acidic. You know, I think we've kind of found that potting soil usually doesn't need to be amended to be more acidic, the pH is usually pretty good for potting soil, but would you recommend maybe like a fertilizer?
Well, if you're going to keep them in pots, and you would need a fairly deep pot to be able to do that. I know people who have done it in a straw bale and have been very successful with it, but that's already has a lot of fertilizer in it to start with. So you would still need to be able to fertilize as you're going through the season.
And even when growing potatoes in a pot, you'd still want to hill or add more soil throughout the growing season, because with potatoes, as they grow, you want to add more soil around them so that they will grow more potato tubers.
I would think you would need a very large pot or sort of like a trough to be able to do that in.
They
I don't
sell
know
those
that
big
you could.
bags. Have you seen those big bags?
Right. That's why I'm saying, that, or, because it's a root vegetable, the same thing with carrots. You would need something that's deep as well as wide. Particularly for the potatoes, you would need something that's quite large. I don't think you might be able to get away with growing carrots in a 5-gallon bucket, but you wouldn't be able to grow potatoes in one.
You have to hill potatoes. The reason we grow a lot of potatoes on the farm, and by bringing soil from the sides up around the edges of the potatoes, it allows the potatoes to form properly without being exposed to sunlight. When potatoes are exposed to sunlight, they produce selene and they turn green, and you wouldn't want to eat them at that point because there's toxins produced in there. So the key with growing healthy potatoes is to have good drainage, so you grow them on raised beds, but you want to be able to have them spread out on the sides. So that's why we will periodically hill the potatoes. So they're a little bit more challenging to grow in a container than other plants would be because of that.
So Cynthia here bought a seed starter mix. Do you find that is better than normal potting soil?
Yes, the seed starter mix would be better than potting soil because it's developed specifically for starting seeds. Sometimes the potting soil has a little bit more fertilizer in it, maybe not quite the kind of drainage. But your seed starting mix is the best thing to use for starting seeds as opposed to potting soil. I tried using potting soil a couple of years ago and I did not have the best success with it. I prefer the seed starting mix.
Where can you buy the downy mildew resistant basil?
There are quite a few varieties that are, and I would suggest whatever seed company that you use, look to see that they have the variety that says DMR, and that would mean that it's downy mildew resistant. As I mentioned, both the Rutgers Obsession and Devotion, and there are apparently 2 others that Rutgers has put out that aren't quite as popular, but those are the 2 popular ones that are DMR. And as I said, just look at the packet, and actually from any company it should say whether or not it's downy mildew resistant. And really, that's very important. You do not want to get something that is not downy mildew resistant because you won't have much success with it, particularly with some of the summers that we have in New Jersey.
And those of you that kind of want to jump from your master gardening into more production, we have a major statewide program that we're going to be, Brendan Pearsall and myself and our team from Rutgers will be launching. So please contact us at beginnerfarmer@njaes.rutgers.edu. We will have beginning classes online, and then we'll get out to the field as soon as we possibly can to show you a lot of great things and ways that you too can get into farming. So I want to thank Vivian for a wonderful presentation today. Vivian, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Happy gardening, everybody.
Stay healthy, everyone, and happy gardening.